At my daughter's engagement party, which I secretly paid for, her future mother-in-law introduced her as the daughter I never had, while my own daughter called her mom. They then cut the cake I funded, completely ignoring me. I stood silent, watching. But by the time I drove home, a very expensive honeymoon was gone. Like and share this story, and tell me where you're listening from. Let's see how far my quiet stand reached. The Westfield Country Club pulsed with the muted hum of celebration, a sound that felt both distant and overwhelmingly present to Eleanor. She stood tucked away, just beyond the ornate velvet curtain that separated the main ballroom from the bustling kitchen entrance, a place Brenda had discreetly suggested for her. Discreet, she understood, meant out of sight, out of mind. At 58, Eleanor had spent a lifetime nurturing, educating, and supporting, first her students, then her only daughter, Clara. Tonight, in a silk dress that had cost her 2 months' pension and the pearl necklace her own mother had worn on her wedding day, she was supposed to be celebrating Clara's engagement to Lucas. Instead, she was an inconvenient shadow. A server, maneuvering a tray laden with champagne flutes, paused, offering one to Eleanor with a polite smile. "Need anything, ma'am? Another tray?" Eleanor managed a weak smile, shaking her head. "No, thank you. Just enjoying the view." She took the champagne, the cold glass, a small comfort against her trembling fingers. The server moved on, clearly having mistaken her for an attendee who had simply wandered a little too close to the service area, or perhaps worse, for part of the hired help. The thought stung, a small, sharp needle in the carefully constructed facade of dignity she wore. She sipped the champagne, its effervescence doing little to lift the heavy cloak of invisibility that seemed to settle over her. Then Clara appeared. Her daughter, glowing and vibrant in a shimmering gown, hurried towards her, a nervous flutter in her eyes. "Mom," she whispered, her voice tight with a tension that mirrored Eleanor's own. "I'm so glad I found you. Brenda was just saying, with Lucas's family, their connections and all, it might be better if you stayed, a little less prominent tonight, just until everyone's arrived. It's just for optics, you understand?" Eleanor felt the familiar pang, a dull ache that started in her chest and spread through her veins. Optics. Her own daughter, the one she had raised on a teacher's modest salary, the one she had put through college with every penny she could save, was asking her to hide, to be less prominent, for Brenda's connections. It wasn't an outright dismissal, but the implication was clear. Eleanor was a liability, not an asset. She was a single, retired public school teacher, and Lucas's family, with their inherited wealth and established social standing, apparently needed to maintain a certain image. Clara's hurried explanation, her inability to meet Eleanor's gaze, only twisted the knife deeper. "Of course, dear," Eleanor managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Whatever Brenda thinks is best." The words tasted like ash. Clara offered a quick, relieved smile, a peck on Eleanor's cheek that felt thus oddly remote, and then rushed back into the glittering throng, eager to rejoin her new family. From her secluded vantage point, Eleanor watched Clara, her daughter's laughter echoing a little too loudly, a little too desperately in the grand hall. Clara moved through the crowd, her arm linked with Lucas's, her eyes constantly darting towards Brenda, seeking approval, a nod, a smile. It was a performance, a carefully orchestrated ballet of social climbing, and Eleanor was an uninvited audience member to her own daughter's transformation. Later, as the evening reached its peak, Brenda, Lucas's mother, gathered a small circle of influential-looking guests. Eleanor watched as Brenda, impeccably dressed and radiating an air of effortless command, draped an arm around Clara. "And this is Clara," Brenda announced, her voice carrying across the polished floors. "Practically the daughter I never had. Such a delight." Eleanor's breath hitched. A fresh wave of betrayal washed over her, chilling her to the bone. To hear another woman claim her daughter, her only child, with such casual possessiveness was a cruelty she hadn't anticipated. Clara, instead of flinching, beamed up at Brenda. "Thank you, Mom," she said, her voice lilting. "Sweet." Then, a moment later, as another guest congratulated Brenda on her wonderful new daughter, Clara echoed, "Oh, they need no." "Yes, Mom is just wonderful, isn't she?" Twice, Eleanor felt a sudden dizzying sense of disorientation, as if the floor had tilted beneath her feet. The centerpiece of the ballroom was a towering, exquisitely decorated engagement cake, a three-tiered confection of white fondant and sugar roses. Eleanor knew, to the penny, what that cake had cost. She had signed the check, a substantial sum from her dwindling savings, just as she had paid for every single detail of this opulent evening. Now Brenda and Lucas stood with Clara, hands clasped around the silver cake knife. Flashbulbs popped, applause erupted, and they cut into the pristine white layers, their faces alight with joy. Not once did Clara glance towards her mother, not a single word of acknowledgement or gratitude was offered. Eleanor was truly invisible. The party continued its glamorous hum, but for Eleanor, time seemed to slow, then accelerate, a blur of faces and laughter. She was about to slip away, her heart aching with a profound, quiet despair, when a snippet of conversation drifted to her from a group standing just behind the curtain. Brenda's distinctive, slightly condescending voice cut through the background chatter. "Of course, I've arranged the honeymoon," she boasted, her voice dripping with satisfaction. 3 weeks in the Maldives, the 4 seasons. Only the best for my son and Clara." A pause, then a dismissive chuckle. "Technically, Eleanor is paying for it, bless her heart. Teacher's pension, or whatever she calls it." Eleanor froze, every nerve ending alert. Brenda continued, her voice dropping slightly, but still clearly audible. "Honestly, the poor woman wouldn't know a luxury resort from a motel, I imagine. But I've ensured they'll have the best of her water bungalow, naturally." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. The disdain, the casual cruelty, the complete lack of respect for her sacrifice. Her teacher's pension, her lifetime of hard work, reduced to whatever she calls it. Her own worth, her experiences, utterly dismissed. Stunned, a cold, hard resolve began to form within her, crystallizing the pain into something new, something unyielding. She didn't feel tears, only a profound, almost primal shift inside her. The hurt was still there, but it was overshadowed now by a quiet, simmering determination. Without another glance back at the glittering party, Eleanor turned and walked out of the Westfield Country Club. The cool night air was a shock after the warm, stifling ballroom. She fumbled with her keys, her hands trembling uncontrollably, and started her old sedan. As she drove, her mind raced, a whirlwind of memories and indignities. Her daughter's dismissive gaze, Brenda's smug pronouncements, the utter invisibility she had felt. The Maldives honeymoon package, a $24,500 extravagance she had booked months ago, fully refundable until midnight. A sudden, clear decision bloomed in her mind, sharp and precise. She pulled into a gas station, the bright fluorescent lights stark against the dark sky. Her phone trembled in her hand as she navigated to the travel agency's website. Her fingers, though shaking, typed quickly, efficiently, the cancellation option. A few clicks, a final confirmation. The screen flashed. "Your cancellation has been processed successfully." A wave of relief, potent and overwhelming, washed over her. It wasn't revenge, not truly. It was a reclaiming, a recognition of a daughter who was ashamed of her. A daughter who valued social connections and superficial approval over a lifetime of unwavering love and sacrifice. It was a clear, undeniable truth that she could no longer ignore. The first rays of morning light filtered through the blinds, casting stripes across Eleanor's bedroom floor. She lay awake, the residue of the previous night's humiliation clinging to her like a damp shroud. The memory of Brenda's dismissive tone, Clara's averted gaze, and the chilling finality of the canceled honeymoon swirled in her mind. She pulled her grandmother's quilt tighter, seeking comfort that eluded her. Her thoughts drifted back, as they often did these days, to a time before Brenda, before Lucas, before this new, glittering world Clara now inhabited. A world where it had always been just Eleanor and Clara. Richard, Clara's father, had left when Clara was 8. Eleanor could still recall the precise thud of the front door closing, the echo of Richard's hurried goodbyes, and the devastating silence that followed. Clara, a bright, bubbly child, had transformed into a small, bewildered figure, her eyes wide with a pain Eleanor knew all too well. "Why did Daddy go, Mommy?" she had asked, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. Eleanor had held her tight, pressing her daughter's head against her chest, feeling the tremors of her small body. We are still a family, sweet pea, she had whispered back the words of fierce promise, not just to Clara but to herself. You and me, against the world. It was a vow Eleanor had taken to heart, a sacred trust. From that day forward, Eleanor had worked with a relentless, quiet determination. Her modest teacher's salary stretched thin, but her spirit never bent. She taught a regular fifth-grade class, then stayed late, tutoring struggling students, correcting papers until the stars appeared in the evening sky. Summers, instead of offering a reprieve, meant teaching summer school. The extra income funneled directly into Clara's future. She insisted Clara remain at Northwood Academy, the private school Richard had initially chosen, unwilling to let his departure diminish her daughter's opportunities. Ballet lessons, piano instruction, weekend art classes. Eleanor sacrificed her own new clothes, deferred her own modest dreams of travel, all to ensure Clara never felt the void of her absent father, never wanted for anything. The sacrifices piled up, each one a testament to her love. For Clara's 16th birthday, Eleanor had surprised her with a used BMW, a sensible 5-year-old model that still sparkled under the dealership lights. Clara's gasp of delight, her exuberant hug, had been worth every extra tutoring session. Every mental calculation Eleanor had made about how many months it would take to pay it off. "It's perfect, Mom," Clara had squealed, throwing her arms around Eleanor's neck. Eleanor had just smiled, a quiet satisfaction blossoming in her chest, even as she silently added up the additional hours she'd need to put in. Then came the college years. Clara, with her sharp mind and unwavering ambition, had set her sights on Northwestern University. The tuition, a staggering sum, loomed large. Eleanor had considered other, more affordable options, but one look at Clara's hopeful face, the sparkle in her eyes when she spoke of her dream school, had sealed it. Without a second thought, Eleanor had depleted her retirement fund, the decades of careful savings evaporating with a few signatures. It was a terrifying step, leaving her feeling exposed and vulnerable, but she justified it easily. Clara's future, Clara's happiness, was her retirement. It was all she needed. At Northwestern, Clara blossomed. She excelled academically, but more significantly, she began to move in different social circles. It was there she met Lucas Reynolds, the charming, affluent son of Dr. Arthur Reynolds, a prominent Chicago surgeon, and Brenda, a well-known socialite. Clara spoke of Lucas with an excitement Eleanor had rarely heard before, painting a picture of a world far removed from their quiet, comfortable home. Eleanor's first meeting with Lucas had been cordial, if a little stiff. He was impeccably polite, but his gaze, when he surveyed their cozy, slightly dated living room, had lingered a moment too long. "It's very cozy," he'd said, a faint, almost imperceptible tilt to his lips. Eleanor had seen the flush creep up Clara's neck, the quick, nervous laugh she offered in response. It was a fleeting moment, but the sting of it lingered. A few weeks later, Clara had tentatively suggested, "Mom, don't you think the living room could use a little update? New paint, maybe a more modern sofa?" It was an innocent enough suggestion, but Eleanor heard the underlying critique, the subtle shift in Clara's perception of their home, of their life. After graduation, Clara moved into a sleek, impossibly stylish downtown apartment. It was far beyond what an entry-level position at a marketing firm could afford. Eleanor knew, without needing to be told, that the Reynolds were subsidizing this new, elevated lifestyle. Clara's visits to Eleanor's modest house became less frequent, and when they did occur, they were often punctuated by subtle, well-meaning critiques. "Mom, have you considered a new haircut? And that sweater? It's a bit provincial, isn't it?" Or, "You really should get out more, Mom. Do you ever go anywhere besides the grocery store and school?" Eleanor would nod, offer a placid smile, but the words chipped away at her, leaving her feeling increasingly out of touch, out of place in her own daughter's evolving world. The first time Eleanor met Brenda Reynolds at their imposing Lake Forest mansion, the chasm between their worlds yawned wide. Brenda, with her perfectly coiffed hair and diamonds that seemed to glitter with their own light, had greeted Eleanor with an air of gracious condescension. "So lovely to finally meet you, Eleanor," she'd purred, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Clara has told us so much about you. A teacher. How quaint. Such important work. Shaping young minds." Eleanor felt the sting of quaint, a word that somehow managed to diminish a lifetime of dedication. Clara, ever attentive to Brenda's mood, had quickly jumped in. Mom loves teaching, Brenda. She's really good at it, actually. But her voice had an edge of apology, of subtle embarrassment, rather than genuine pride. Eleanor saw it, felt it. Over the next few months, Eleanor watched Clara transform. She began to adopt Brenda's refined cadence, her measured gestures, her effortless command of a world Eleanor couldn't afford and didn't understand. Clara started referencing the club, our summer in Nantucket, the Hamptons, a lexicon of exclusivity that made Eleanor feel increasingly like an outsider, a relic of a life Clara was eager to leave behind. When Lucas proposed, Clara's call to Eleanor had been a torrent of ecstatic details. The size of the diamond, the exquisite setting, Brenda's immediate plans for a grand engagement party, and a wedding at the Westfield Country Club. Eleanor had listened, her heart aching with a familiar blend of joy for her daughter and a profound sense of detachment. She had offered tentatively, "Clara, I'd love to help financially with the wedding. Whatever you need." Clara had interrupted her. "Oh, Mom, that's so sweet, but Brenda has everything under control. She knows what she's doing. She's already spoken to all the best planners." The message was clear. Eleanor's input was not needed. "Perhaps there are other ways you could help," Clara had added, almost as an afterthought, and those other ways quickly became apparent. They meant Eleanor quietly writing checks, electronically transferring funds for everything Brenda chose and arranged. The catering, the flowers, the designer gown, the opulent venue, and ultimately, the lavish honeymoon. Her role was reduced to that of a silent financier, stripped of any agency, any involvement beyond the purely monetary. The promise she had made to Clara, "You and me against the world," now felt like a cruel irony. Clara had clearly chosen a different world and a different mom. 3 days later, the phone rang, shattering the fragile peace Eleanor had managed to construct around herself. She recognized Clara's number, but the voice that barked through the receiver was sharp, laced with an unfamiliar fury. "Mom, what did you do?" Clara shrieked, the question a raw accusation. "The honeymoon, it was canceled. What is going on?" Eleanor took a slow, deep breath, anchoring herself. The days since the engagement party had been filled with a quiet reckoning, a sorting of pain and resolve. "I canceled it, Clara," she confirmed, her voice calm, steady. "I've reconsidered my contribution to that particular part of your wedding." A stunned silence stretched between them. Then Clara's voice erupted, higher pitched now, verging on hysterical. "Reconsidered? Mom, are you serious? Brenda has told everyone about the Maldives. Everyone! Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? How could you do this?" "Embarrassing?" Eleanor echoed, a cold, hard knot forming in her stomach. "You want to talk about embarrassment, Clara? Let's talk about being placed behind a velvet curtain at your own engagement party. A party, I might add, that I paid for entirely. Every single orchid, every champagne flute, every perfectly arranged canapé." Clara scoffed, a sound of dismissive irritation. "Oh, Mom, don't be so dramatic. That's just you being petty because of some seating arrangement. Brenda was just trying to make everything perfect for Lucas's family. You know, for optics." "Optics, you say?" Eleanor's voice remained even, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "And Brenda accepting all the compliments for the magnificent event she supposedly organized? And you, Clara, calling her mom not once but twice, while I stood there an unacknowledged ghost, the actual mother who made it all possible." There was a pause, a slight hesitation on Clara's end. Eleanor pressed on, her voice gaining a quiet power. "I also heard Brenda boasting about arranging this extravagant honeymoon, this 3-week luxury trip to the Maldives." And then she added, "Technically, Eleanor is paying for it, teacher's pension, or whatever." And that, Clara, was when I realized the extent of my humiliation. My $24,500, my lifetime of savings, treated with such casual contempt. Clara's voice, when she finally spoke, was steeped in a new kind of disdain, colder, sharper. "So this is about the money then? All of this? I thought you wanted to contribute, Mom. You offered." "Contributing is one thing," Eleanor asserted, her voice unwavering now. Being exploited, being demeaned, and being treated as an embarrassment while I contribute is entirely another. My contribution was an act of love, Clara, not an open invitation to be insulted. The conversation ended abruptly after that. Clara hung up, clearly incandescent with rage. Eleanor knew it wouldn't be the end. She braced herself, and indeed an hour later, the doorbell chimed. She opened it to find Clara, Lucas, and Brenda standing on her porch, a formidable united front. Clara's face was flushed, her eyes blazing with indignation. Lucas stood beside her, his expression a mixture of irritation and barely concealed superiority. Brenda, however, took charge, stepping forward with a practiced, placating smile. "Eleanor, dear," Brenda began, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that grated on Eleanor's nerves. "We just wanted to clear up this unfortunate misunderstanding about the engagement party and this silly cancellation. I assure you your discreet placement was entirely for your benefit to ensure you were comfortable." She waved a dismissive hand as if swatting away a fly. Eleanor met Brenda's gaze, her own eyes clear and unblinking. "For my benefit?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "Being hidden away from my daughter's engagement party, which I funded, was for my benefit? Being treated as an undesirable guest in my own daughter's life?" Clara interjected, her voice tight with exasperation. "Mom, come on. You know how you get in social situations. You always talk about your students or school issues. It's just not, well, it's not the kind of conversation Lucas's family is used to. Brenda was just trying to spare you from feeling awkward." Eleanor looked at Clara, truly looked at her. Her daughter, her sweet pea, the child she had protected and nurtured, was now looking at her with thinly veiled disdain. When had her little girl become this person? This stranger who thought her own mother needed to be hidden, her life deemed unworthy of polite conversation? The realization was a fresh wave of grief. "What I want, Clara," Eleanor declared, her voice gaining strength, resonating with a newfound authority, "is for my daughter to not be ashamed of me, for her to acknowledge me, her mother, who sacrificed everything for her instead of letting another woman take all the credit and claim her as her own." Clara's face crumpled then, a mask of anger slipping to reveal something raw and vulnerable beneath. "Mom, stop," she pleaded, her voice a low, humiliated whisper. "You're embarrassing me." The words hung in the air, a cruel echo of the very thing Eleanor had just spoken of. "You're embarrassing me." It was out. The unspoken truth, finally articulated. Eleanor took a deep breath, the pain sharp but familiar. She had prepared for this. She had built her resolve brick by painful brick. "Then I regret to inform you, Clara," Eleanor stated, her voice steady and resolute, "that the honeymoon cancellation stands, and I will not be contributing anything further to the wedding. Not a single cent. You and Lucas, and Brenda, if she's so capable, will have to arrange the rest yourselves." The silence in the small living room was deafening. Brenda's carefully constructed smile faltered, replaced by a look of utter shock. Lucas's jaw clenched. Clara stared at Eleanor, her eyes wide with disbelief, then narrowed with a cold fury. Without another word, Brenda turned on her heel and swept out, Lucas following stiffly behind. Clara lingered for a moment, her gaze fixed on Eleanor, her face a storm of conflicting emotions. As she passed the threshold, she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I never thought you could be so selfish, Mom." The front door clicked shut, leaving Eleanor alone in the sudden, echoing quiet. Clara's words, sharp and undeserved, pierced her heart. It broke, a little, but even as it ached, Eleanor felt a strange, unfamiliar lightness. A line had been drawn, and for the first time in a very long time, Eleanor felt like she could breathe. The silence that settled over Eleanor's small house after Clara, Lucas, and Brenda had stormed out was profound, almost palpable. It wasn't the empty silence of loneliness, but rather a silence imbued with a new clarity, a resonant hum of burgeoning self-awareness. Eleanor walked through her living room, her gaze sweeping over the familiar furniture, each piece a silent testament to decades of careful choices made not for herself but for Clara. The worn armchair where she'd read countless bedtime stories, the slightly chipped coffee table where Clara had done her homework, the faded floral wallpaper that Eleanor had considered replacing a dozen times but always deferred, prioritizing Clara's needs. She sat at her kitchen table, opened her laptop, and stared at the glowing number on her bank statement. $24,500, the refunded honeymoon money. For the first time in her adult life, Eleanor felt a thrill, a flutter of anticipation about spending money purely on herself. Not on a new dress for a school event, not on a textbook for Clara, not on a bill that couldn't wait, but solely, joyfully on Eleanor. Her mind drifted back to a time before marriage, before motherhood, when her hands had found solace and joy in the malleable earth of clay. She had loved pottery, the way a form emerged from a shapeless lump under her touch. With a decisive click, Eleanor searched for local adult education classes and found a beginner's pottery workshop starting next week. She registered, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. It was a small step, yet it felt monumental. That single act of self-prioritization unleashed a cascade of other choices. The next day, she scheduled an appointment with an interior designer she'd admired in a local magazine, a bold move for someone who had always picked out furniture based on practicality and price. Then, a quick search for a salon specializing in styles for women over 50, a place where she could finally shed the sensible, unchanging haircut she'd worn for 2 decades. The thought of a fresh look, a new color, sent a spark of excitement through her. Later that afternoon, she found herself dialing Helen, a retired colleague and dear friend. Helen had, for years, invited Eleanor to join her on various adventures, particularly her annual writers' retreat in a quaint coastal town in Maine. Eleanor had always declined, citing Clara's needs, her demanding schedule, the ever-present financial constraints. "Helen, it's Eleanor," she began, a hint of nervousness in her voice. "That writer's retreat in Maine, is there still a spot open?" Helen's delighted gasp was audible even over the phone. "Eleanor, I can't believe it. Yes, absolutely. What's changed, my dear? Did you finally win the lottery?" Eleanor found herself recounting the events of the past week, the engagement party, the cancellation, the confrontation. As she spoke, the words flowed easily, liberated. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding in, how much the quiet shame and humiliation had weighed on her. Helen listened, her occasional interjections filled with warmth and understanding, not judgment. "It's about time, Elle," Helen said gently when Eleanor finished. "You've given everything for that girl. It's your turn now." The validation was a balm to Eleanor's soul. By the end of the call, Eleanor had booked her flight to Maine, a 17-day trip that felt like a wild, glorious extravagance. Over the next week, Clara's texts and calls grew increasingly frantic. "Mom, we need to talk. The caterer needs a deposit. What do I tell them? Lucas's parents are furious about the honeymoon. You're making this so difficult." Eleanor read them, her finger hovering over the reply button, but she didn't respond. She was too busy. She was choosing paint swatches, exploring pottery techniques, and researching the best hiking trails in Maine. This silence wasn't punitive. It was simply a necessity, a protective barrier around her fragile, emerging self. On the 7th day, a furious pounding on her front door jolted Eleanor from her contemplation of a new rug. It was Clara, her eyes red-rimmed, her face a mask of frustration and anger. "Mom, why haven't you been answering my calls?" she demanded, pushing past Eleanor into the house. Her words, however, caught in her throat. She stopped abruptly, her gaze sweeping over the living room. The room had been transformed. The faded floral wallpaper was gone, replaced by soft sage green paint that lent a serene, earthy glow to the space. The old, lumpy sofa was replaced by a sleek, stylish sectional in a sophisticated charcoal gray. New abstract art adorned the walls, pieces Eleanor had chosen herself, not for their investment value or social cachet, but simply because she loved them. "What happened in here?" Clara whispered, her voice laced with bewilderment. Eleanor merely smiled. "I'm redecorating," she stated calmly, stepping further into the room, embracing the new energy. Clara, still reeling from the visual shock, pivoted back to her primary agenda. "Mom, we need to talk about the wedding and the honeymoon money. We can't afford a wedding like Brenda planned without it. Where is it?" Eleanor looked at her daughter, her gaze steady. Wow, Clara, she gently corrected. That wasn't the honeymoon money. That was my money. Money I saved by tutoring extra hours, by teaching summer school, by never taking vacations, by putting your needs first for decades. And now, she paused, letting the words sink in, I'm choosing to spend it differently. Clara's face flushed scarlet. Is this a punishment, Mom? Because Lucas's parents are saying you're being vindictive. Brenda is telling everyone. Are you trying to embarrass me again? This isn't about Brenda or Lucas or even the engagement party, Clara. Eleanor clarified, her voice soft but firm. This is about me finally recognizing my own worth. It's about deciding that after a lifetime of giving everything, it's time to invest in myself. You're abandoning me, Clara accused, her voice rising, tinged with a childish petulance. 4 months before my wedding, how could you do this? I'm not abandoning you, Clara, Eleanor asserted, walking to the window and gazing out at her small garden. I'm still your mother, and I still love you. But I won't be treated as an embarrassment or an ATM. My love isn't conditional, but my financial contributions now are. Then, almost as an afterthought, Eleanor added, oh, and you'll need to handle the menu tastings and the floral arrangements on your own for a while. I'm leaving for Maine in 2 days for a 17-day writer's retreat. Clara stared at her, utterly stunned, her mouth slightly agape. A 17-day trip? To Maine? Her mother? The concept seemed to short-circuit her understanding of Eleanor. I will be at your wedding, Clara, Eleanor said, meeting her daughter's bewildered gaze. As your mother. But I won't be financing it if I'm continually treated as an afterthought. Clara's face hardened. She said nothing more, simply turned and strode out, slamming the door behind her with a resounding thud. Eleanor flinched slightly, but then a quiet smile touched her lips. She looked around her newly refreshed living room, at the new art, at the pottery wheel she had ordered that morning, waiting to be assembled. I'm just getting to know her myself, Eleanor whispered to the silent room, a private acknowledgement of the woman she was becoming. If you're finding this story gripping, remember to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the dramatic conclusion. Your support helps me share these raw, personal journeys. The following week unfolded as a blur of purposeful activity for Eleanor. Her home, once a static shrine to Clara's past, continued its quiet transformation. She cleared out closets, donating bags of clothes she'd kept just in case, or for a special occasion, that never seemed to arrive for her. Each discarded item felt like shedding a layer of her former self, a tangible act of liberation. She also registered for a retirement planning seminar, a pragmatic step towards securing her future now that her primary retirement fund had been reallocated to Clara's education. This time the seminar was for her, to learn how to rebuild, how to thrive. The night before her flight to Maine, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from Brenda. Eleanor watched the name flash, felt the familiar knot of anxiety, but this time it was fleeting. She let it ring, then sent a curt text message. I have said everything I need to say. Please respect my boundaries. With a sense of calm defiance, she switched off her phone entirely. That night, for the first time in years, Eleanor slept deeply, her dreams not filled with anxieties about Clara or past regrets, but with a vague, shimmering vision of a future that was entirely her own. Months blurred into a vibrant tapestry of self-discovery. Maine invigorated her, the crisp air and rugged coastline awakening a long-dormant creativity. Her pottery classes became a sanctuary, the clay a willing canvas for emotions she hadn't known how to express. She learned, she experimented, she failed, and she tried again, her hands covered in earth, her heart alight with a quiet, growing joy. Then came the day that, for so long, had been circled in red on her mental calendar, Clara's wedding day. But Eleanor was not at the grand venue Brenda had undoubtedly secured, nor was she fretting over a dress or battling traffic. Instead, she stood amidst the hushed reverence of the local community center gallery, carefully arranging pieces for her first-ever art exhibition. Her hands, once trembling with anxiety, now moved with a practiced confidence, placing each ceramic bowl, each sculpted figure, with an artist's precision. Eleanor, these are truly exceptional for a beginner, Michael, her pottery instructor, remarked. his voice full of genuine admiration as he surveyed her display. You have a real gift. This blue glazed bowl in particular has such depth. Eleanor looked at the piece, her favorite, a swirl of deep cerulean and hints of shimmering gold, a reflection of the ocean in the sky she had seen in Maine. A profound sense of pride, unlike any she had felt before, swelled within her. Her phone remained silent, a testament to the calcified silence between her and Clara. 2 weeks prior, Eleanor had carefully penned a card. My dearest Clara, it read, on your wedding day, know that I love you and wish you every happiness. While I won't be attending the ceremony, please know this decision comes not from lack of love, but from self-respect and a need to heal. She had addressed it to Clara, sent it with the hope that her daughter might understand, might, in time, forgive. But the card had been returned a few days later, unopened, stamped boldly with refused. Brenda, however, had found a way to reach her. A cold, sharp call had cut through her peace. How dare you, Eleanor? Brenda's voice had been a venomous hiss. How dare you abandon your daughter on her wedding day after everything she's done for you? Eleanor had held her ground. What exactly has Clara done for me? Brenda, she had countered, her voice steady, refusing to be drawn into the familiar narrative of her sacrifice being owed. Brenda had hung up, sputtering with indignation. Now at the exhibition, people milled about, murmuring appreciative comments. Eleanor felt a surge of validation as she watched a woman carefully select and purchase one of her smaller vases. Then another and another. By the end of the afternoon, 6 of her pieces had sold, including her cherished blue glazed bowl. The money, a modest sum, felt like a king's ransom, earned solely through her own talent and effort. Her colleague, Sarah, a kind, gossipy woman from her former school, stopped by the gallery. Eleanor, your work is truly stunning, she exclaimed, embracing her warmly. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, Oh, I saw the wedding announcement in the paper. Clara's. It was a lovely, intimate affair, much smaller than Brenda had originally envisioned, though, and no mention of a Maldives honeymoon, oddly enough. Eleanor offered a faint smile. Yes, they scaled back, she confirmed. She felt a twinge of something, not regret for her actions, but a sadness for the circumstances. I regret that it came to this, she admitted to Sarah, that things had to break down so completely. But I don't regret finally valuing myself enough to say no. Sarah squeezed her hand, her eyes conveying understanding. As the exhibition wound down, Eleanor checked her phone, which she had finally turned back on. There was one unread text message from an unknown number. She opened it. It was from Lucas. Eleanor, it read, Clara looked for you today. Brenda told everyone you were too busy with your little pottery hobby to attend. I just wanted you to know that Clara seemed disappointed. She looked for you. Eleanor's hands began to tremble. Too busy with her little pottery hobby. Brenda had twisted her absence into a caricature of indifference, an insult to both Eleanor and Clara. She had weaponized Eleanor's newfound passion, using it to underscore the narrative that Eleanor was selfish and uncaring. The return card, her heartfelt explanation, had never reached Clara's eyes. The realization was a bitter pill. With a deep breath, Eleanor texted Lucas back. Thank you for letting me know, Lucas. Clara received my explanation in a card, which she unfortunately returned. I wish you both every happiness. She hoped Lucas would understand the nuance, the unspoken plea that he might eventually convey the truth to Clara. Driving home through the twilight, Eleanor felt a strange, unsettling mixture of emotions. There was a profound sadness for the fractured relationship with her daughter, a grief for the words that had gone unread, the explanations unheard. Yet there was also an undeniable sense of liberation, a quiet triumph. She was an absent mother, yes, on a day society decreed she should be present, but she was also a present artist, a woman embracing a self she had long denied. The contradiction was stark, yet in it, Eleanor found a new kind of peace. Almost a year passed since Clara's wedding day, a year that Eleanor had meticulously sculpted into a life she truly desired. Her small house was now not just a home, but a sanctuary, and more recently, a thriving studio. She had converted the spare bedroom into her own pottery workspace, complete with a new wheel and a small kiln. Here, surrounded by clay and glazes, she spent hours, lost in the rhythm of creation, her hands shaping not just vessels, but a new identity. Her friendships, particularly with Helen, had deepened, solidified by shared experiences and genuine connection. She had traveled alone, a 2-week trip to Italy where she walked ancient streets and lingered over espresso, feeling perfectly complete in my solitude, a profound sense of contentment she had never imagined possible. One Wednesday afternoon, the familiar chime of her doorbell startled her. When she opened it, she found Clara standing on her porch. Her daughter's hair was shorter, framing a face that was noticeably thinner, etched with a wariness Eleanor hadn't seen before. The confident, almost haughty poise Clara had adopted in Brenda's world was gone, replaced by a vulnerability that tugged at Eleanor's maternal instincts. She stood still, not moving to embrace her, but her heart ached with a complex mix of emotions. "Mom," Clara whispered, her voice a little hoarse. Eleanor merely nodded, a calm invitation. "Clara, come in." Clara stepped inside, her eyes widening as she took in the transformed living room. The sage green walls, the elegant new furniture, and most strikingly, Eleanor's own ceramic art displayed on shelves and pedestals. "Your home looks beautiful," Clara murmured, a genuine surprise in her tone. "Different but beautiful." "It feels more like me now," Eleanor confirmed, her voice soft. She gestured to the newly upholstered armchair. "Would you like some tea?" They sat, the silence initially heavy, filled with unspoken words and months of estrangement. Eleanor poured chamomile, its soothing aroma filling the air. Clara took a sip, her hands trembling slightly around the mug. Then she looked up, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. "Mom," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "I'm pregnant." A complex wave washed over Eleanor, a surge of pure, unadulterated joy for her daughter, a pang of sadness for the lost months, and a deep concern for the evident strain Clara was under. "Oh, Clara," she breathed, reaching out and briefly, gently, touching her daughter's hand before withdrawing it. "That's wonderful news. And you look so tired, sweetheart." Clara's lips quivered. "I came because I want my child to know their grandmother. I want them to know you." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "And because I owe you an apology. A huge one." Eleanor listened, her gaze steady, patient. Clara explained, her words tumbling out in a rush, a dam finally breaking. After the wedding, Brenda's control, it just intensified. Every decision, every plan, it had to be hers. Even Lucas started to get tired of it. Then a few weeks ago, she made a comment about raising the baby properly, unlike Clara's mother. And it hit me, Mom. It just hit me. All this time, I was trying so hard to get her approval, to fit into her world, and I was pushing away the one person who loved me unconditionally, who actually raised me properly. Tears streamed down Clara's face now, unhindered. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I was ashamed, ashamed of our home, of your of everything that made us us. I hid you away because I was so desperate to be accepted into their world. And the more I tried, the more I felt, I don't know, more alone or less authentic." Eleanor nodded slowly, her own eyes moist. "That world can be very seductive, Clara. The allure of belonging, of wealth and status, it's powerful. But true belonging, true worth doesn't come from external validation." Clara reached across the table, tentatively taking Eleanor's hand. Her grip was fragile yet determined. "I understand that now, Mom, I really do. And I regret everything, every dismissive word, every hidden moment. I was so wrong." Eleanor squeezed Clara's hand gently. "I won't pretend the hurt didn't happen, Clara. It did. And some of it runs deep. But I'm not interested in resentment, not anymore. Especially not with a grandchild on the way." She looked into Clara's tear-filled eyes. "I want to be part of your baby's life, Clara, more than anything. But things have to be different between us. It has to be based on mutual respect, on honesty. No more hiding, no more shame." Clara nodded vigorously. "Yes, Mom, absolutely. Lucas feels the same. He's been setting boundaries with Brenda, too. She still sends passive-aggressive texts daily, but we're learning to ignore them." A faint, tired smile touched her lips. "You've changed, Mom," Clara said, her gaze sweeping over Eleanor's serene face, her elegant new haircut, the quiet confidence that radiated from her. Eleanor offered a soft, knowing smile. I haven't changed, Clara. I've become more myself. There's a difference. They talked for another hour, not about past hurts, but about hopes and fears, about the baby, about Clara's burgeoning desire to move out of the downtown apartment and find a quieter, more grounded life. For the first time in years, they truly connected, mother and daughter, no longer separated by a velvet curtain or a chasm of unspoken expectations. As Clara stood to leave, she paused at the door. Mom, she said, a shy hope in her voice, could I, could I come back next week? Maybe you could teach me some pottery? I remember watching you sometimes when I was little. Eleanor's heart swelled. She walked forward, this time embracing her daughter fully, holding her close. Of course, sweet pea, she whispered. The old endearment, a comforting warmth between them. I'd love that. Later that evening, in the quiet solitude of her studio, Eleanor sat at her pottery wheel. She centered a fresh lump of clay, her hands moving with practiced ease. She began to shape a vessel, simple and sturdy, yet with an elegant curve, a hint of blue glaze already forming in her mind. A bowl, she thought, for her grandchild, a vessel to hold soup or fruit, or perhaps one day the stories of a family that had learned through pain and separation the profound lessons of worth, authenticity, and real unconditional love. Lessons she was now ready to pass on.